Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling host JP John Poz. With me today, very special returning guest, of course, wrestling historian and author here to discuss bigger, better, better WrestleMania III, Mr. Keith Elliot Greenberg. Welcome back. How you doing?
Hey, John. Great to see you again.
What is going on with bigger, better, better? Tell us what's going on in your world and the whirlwind going on with this book.
Is there a whirlwind yet? I mean, the book, we just had our release party last week. It's starting to get some attention. Copies have not arrived in everyone's hands, but so far so good. I haven't had a negative reaction yet.
Excellent. Why this book? Why now? Tell us all about bigger, better, better.
And I tell this story in every interview, but it's worth retelling.
Yep.
When I was at WrestleMania 39 2 years ago in Los Angeles, I found myself consistently trying to decipher how the splendor of WrestleMania week occurred, because it's no longer WrestleMania that's the event. It's all the events that happen on WrestleMania week, and not all of them WWE events. And by my thinking, the turning point was WrestleMania 3. WrestleMania 1 was a fad. WrestleMania 2 was Vince McMahon posturing to show that the company was now in all three cities in a national company. WrestleMania 3, WWE sold out an NFL stadium. And people traveled at that point by car, from as far down as, say, Indiana, and as far north as deep in Ontario, maybe Quebec. And that is the turning point when WWE and professional wrestling became something even the cynics were forced to take seriously.
It does seem like that is the turning point. I know Hulk Hogan 84, Hulkamania, the Hogan, like that's the start, but it feels like 87.
Well, and I explain, as you saw in the book, Vince McMahon was building to that moment. Hulk Hogan winning the title, WrestleMania 1, everything else Vince McMahon was doing.
And even today, every opening video starts with Hogan, André, WrestleMania 3. Even like they're, then, now, whatever. They all start with the slam. So, they still acknowledge it to this day as being like the turning point.
And this is a company that continuously reinvents itself, and that's a good thing for them, but still it goes back to WrestleMania 3, and it's reaffirmed by what you just said.
It's to me amazing, especially as a fan, super young fan at this point, but WrestleMania 3 is like the jumping off point where it's like, okay, this is mainstream. It kind of already was mainstream a little bit, but like now it like,
no, but this was the turning point, because I think before, was it mainstream or was it a fad? I think a lot of people thought it would go out of style soon enough. It would be like other fads. It would be like later on the Macarena would be. People are no longer dancing the Macarena.
Right. They know what it is, but yeah, exactly. Yeah. With this though, it is crazy. Like when you think about 93,000 people selling out a football stadium.
Right. And look, the attendance is in debate, and I discussed that in the book. But it certainly looks sold out. And Vince McMahon said he did not want to see any empty seats. And I don't know. You've seen the recordings. You don't see any empty seats.
That's the thing. Why is that such a debate? And I've talked to other, wrestling historians. I've talked to people like, why are people so like caught up on it? Like, this wasn't 93,000. It was this, it was that.
Well, it probably wasn't 93,000. Vince was pretty fixated on beating. He knew there was going to be a papal mass later on the year. He was determined to even beat that number. So, the people, and I quote them in the book, the executives were looking up other attendance numbers, and they had to come up with a number that was bigger, better, and badder. And so people are still arguing over how many people were in the building. And, there's an entire section of the book devoted to that. It was a massive number. No one can debate that.
I love that, people get so fixated on it and even fight over it and argue and get upset over it.
To this day, all these years later, with everything else that is going on in this world.
It's just one of those things. It's such a great talking point. It's like, well, if you didn't count the boxes, like the suites, or
Right.
and if every seat is sold,
or if you didn't, if you didn't count the comps. And then Basil DeVito, who was one of the executives, talks about that he counted every parking lot attendant. He counted every security guard, every hot dog vendor. And then Tom Buchanan, who was a photographer, says at a certain point there were tailgating parties with people who didn't have tickets, and they were all allowed in. So they did their best. Let's say the arena was filled.
Definitely. I just love that debate because people for some reason, it drives some people just absolutely bonkers to discuss the number. Like, it wasn't that. Yes, it was. And the back and forth.
But
I love it.
No one can deny that they sold out an NFL stadium.
Yep. And look, 1987. I mean, we're still obsessed with it today. And obviously that's why he wrote the book. People are still obsessed with WrestleMania 3 to this day.
Right, as evidenced by what you just cited, like the Hogan slamming Andre. And as we know, Hogan had slammed Andre multiple times before. And once again, there's an entire section in the book about Andre being slammed. And also, this was supposed to be the first clash between Hogan and Andre. And I believe if you count tag team matches, they had clashed more than 60 times before. But it didn't matter. It was a movie. And it doesn't matter that if you watch, say, HBO, Walter Goggins is Reverend Baby Billy on the Righteous Gemstones. And he's also that really creepy guy going to Bangkok on the White Lotus. It's a movie. And you buy into the story you're watching.
Definitely. And Andre has been slammed by other people before that as well, which doesn't get accounted for. You don't even think about it, really. And the great part to me is just the build-up, because Andre was a babyface forever, and they pretend he's undefeated forever.
A babyface forever in the United States.
Right.
Not in Japan. Like when I was talking to Dave Meltzer, it's like, I said, well, no one's ever seen, Andre as a heel before. He's like, I did. I go, yeah, but you're Dave Meltzer and you were going to Japan to watch wrestling. Most people, believe it or not, are not Dave Meltzer.
That is true. That very, very true. Like us in the States, we're thinking he's been a babyface forever, his whole career. Right. He's got to be, because that's what we saw.
I don't remember. I'm old enough. I remember Andre debuting in the old WWF, and I knew from the wrestling magazines that he'd been Jean Ferret in the Quebec territory. I think he'd been the AWA. As far as we knew, he'd never been a heel.
Do you think that was the plan all along? Hogan, Andre to be a heel, sell out the stadium. It's like, was that Vince's plan all along?
I don't know. I do know from people who worked for Vince that Vince was always thinking a couple of years ahead. So perhaps, that moment where Hogan wins the title in 84 and Andre pours champagne on his head, maybe Vince was thinking this is going to be a setup for Andre turning on Hulk Hogan. But, I requested that Vince participate in the book. He respectfully declined. And so I did not receive that answer.
When, when you're reaching out to Vince, do you think, I don't know if he'll do it? You know what I mean? Are you just hopeful?
Look, you know what? There have been times that I've reached out to Vince and I've gotten a phone call. So I never know.
One of those things with the Andre, the heel turn, where obviously he's the heel. The best part is he doesn't necessarily have to do anything as far as being like Cena, for instance, kicking
Right.
Cody and turning. He
Right,
just
and
has
that's
to
a
show
heavy
up.
heel turn, right?
Yes, yes. But he just had a show with Bobby Heenan, and then boom, it's like,
Well,
oh, we hate
Bobby
this guy.
Heenan, and again, there's like this sub story where Bobby Heenan's manipulating him. And if you're like, under say 13 or 14, it's like, yeah, he's being, he's being molded into a heel. But like if you think about it intellectually, Andre has, supported Hulk Hogan, Paul Mr. Wonderful Horndorf, Greg the Hammer Valentine, King Kong Bundy. They're all getting title shots. What about me? On the other hand, you can say, well, you should have asked for it. And none of us remember him asking for it. Hence, he's a heel.
So great though, because Heenan is so hated that if you're with Heenan by any sort of
Be
way,
free.
you're absolutely hated as well. It's
Sorry,
just, what I mean?
we froze for a while. So you said so great though because.
Oh, because Bobby Heenan can just show up and whoever's with him is automatically hated as much as he is. It's like he's like the perfect manager, that type, because he's got so much heat. It's unbelievable how much heat.
Yeah, and this is a time when fans were beginning to get smartened up to the business, but they weren't completely smartened up to the business. And again, realize a lot of the audience are young kids. And I don't think even today, young kids have the capacity to fully understand that this is theater. Like Brian Solomon, the other great wrestling writer I consider a dear friend and a peer, who wrote the book on the original Sheik and the upcoming book on Gorilla Monsoon. He has a 7-year-old son, and he said his 7-year-old son was watching Elimination Chamber with a few friends, and when Cena turned on Cody, his son pulled off his wristbands and said, "Daddy, I don't think I'm going to wear these anymore."
Wow, powerful! Damn,
powerful, yeah.
Yeah, he was not happy with the heel turn.
And we have to all remember we came from that. We all
Yes.
became wrestling fans as children, unless you're one of those people who, and I have met people who, during the pandemic, they were, desperate for any type of entertainment, and they were adults and they became fans then. All of us were that kid at one point. And so Andre turning against Hogan, Andre simply aligning himself with Heenan was unthinkable in that type of mind.
I love too when he rips the cross off.
The crucifix. So there's also
Yeah.
like he's destroying Christianity in the process. He's almost like, the people who resisted the Crusaders, even though you could argue that, maybe the Crusaders had no business invading Jerusalem.
Right, yeah. The crazy thing too is Piper's so into it, he goes, "Hulk, you're bleeding," because he had
You're bleeding, as if like Piper, who had this vicious feud with Hogan, would be so concerned about a little bit of blood.
If you look at like just the scene, Hogan, Andre, Heenan, Piper, and then Jesse the Body, like 5 of the All-Timers,
like, such great talents right there.
And it's all wrapped around, like obviously remember the trophy and then the bigger trophy, and it's so good. It's a great job by
right. And it's simple. It's very simple storytelling because the fans did not demand as much as they demand now. Like people criticize AEW. Oh, their storytelling's weak. Their storytelling is, eons advanced from what the storytelling was then. And WWE storytelling is among the best it's ever been in the company's history.
Absolutely. So did you like the Cena turn? Obviously Brian Solomon's son did not, but did you like it?
Yeah, I did, and I was not. Maybe I'm the mark because I was not mentally prepared for that. I was mentally prepared for Cena winning the Elimination Chamber, And I was concerned that from a WWE standpoint, Cody might get booed, because I remember back in, I think it was 2002 at WrestleMania, when a heel Hulk Hogan with the NWA wrestled The Rock. The Rock was booed. For nostalgic reasons, the fans embraced Hogan. And I thought that Cody Rhodes would suffer that. And, look, Cody Rhodes has been playing the white meat baby face. And if you're an older teenager, a male, or if you're like a guy in his 20s, you're not digging that. But now everyone's behind Cody.
Yeah, big time. And there are a lot of F John Cena chants I've been hearing.
Yes.
So
which is finally what Cena is happy to hear. Now, Cena, being the professional that he is, during the period when people were chanting John Cena sucks, he went with it. He didn't get distressed. They sold Cena sucks t-shirts, and John Cena profited from that. And I'm sure he's wanted to have a heel turn for a long time. So good. Let him enjoy that on the way out. I'm sure he will retire as a babyface.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like when you look at Hogan Andre, right? Andre turns heel. Is there ever actually a moment where Andre's going to win that match? Because why is that it's kind of like a little bit of lore. Like, why is that out there? I feel like there was no way Hogan was going to lose, right? Or unless maybe he really was.
No. I mean, in the book, I quote like people's predictions, and I think the Detroit Free Press said Andre can't lose. He's infallible. I quote that. And, there's that moment where in the beginning of the match where Hogan lifts Andre and Andre falls on top of Hogan, and it looks like he's pinned. Like Joey Morello, the referee, counts 1, 2, and I think he slaps the mat a third time. And then I didn't mean that. That didn't count. So obviously that led to rematch. Okay. We just lost the power again. But to some fans, it seemed like in that moment, Andre had won.
Yep. Very interesting. Like you said, led to rematches, but it felt like the rematches not only led to like TV rating stuff, but it led to creation of other pay-per-views and other live events. I mean, this set it off like crazy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it was also a launching point for WWF or WWE, as we call it today, as a company, because with each television triumph, the other companies suffered. And this book talks about what it was like to play on the losing team for, Jim Crockett Promotions and the Florida Promotion and the AWA and, the Calgary. Every other promotion was suffering to a large extent because of what was going on in the WWF, and how Bill Watts talks to me about how his Mid-South promotion, would fold around that time. And all the attention was going to Vince McMahon's promotion. I mean, William Regal and Robbie Brookside are wrestling in England, and they tell me they finally get a VHS cassette of WrestleMania III, like in July, all these months later. And they're like, well, it's gigantic, but it's America. Everything's bigger in America. Vince is obviously, whoever this Vince McMahon is, he's obviously so busy, he's never going to come over here. And then, month and a half later, he's doing a show in Paris. And they're like, oh my God, he's coming for us too.
Man, international juggernaut, as you like to say. But
right.
They literally just completely take over the world. It is crazy. Andre, such a big draw. You think Hogan, Andre, is that Hogan's biggest feud, just like money wise and just everything wise?
That's a good question. I mean, he's had some great feuds, as has Andre. It might be even more than Piper, and I can say this now that Piper's no longer alive because Piper would be very offended by this. I think even more so than Piper, it's Hogan's most remembered feud. Like when I hold up the cover of this book, I can hold this book in front of, somebody who's 22 years old and doesn't watch wrestling, and they go, Andre the Giant, Hulk Hogan.
Very true. They're like beyond mainstream. I mean, they're like
Right.
a part of the Americana.
The culture. They're part of the fabric of pop culture. It's like holding up a Beatles poster.
Yeah. Yep. So true. The cool thing about that is it's like that Mania is so good that everyone also remembers like Macho Man Randy Savage versus Steamboat. Like they almost not tit for tat because obviously Hogan Andre sold the show, but everybody always goes, "Oh, but that was the best match." So it's kind of cool to elevate the other guys too.
Right, and Jerry Briscoe, who was working backstage for WWF or WWE at the time, said that was basically their buffer, not their buffer, that was their fallback in case Andre did not have the physical capacity to put on an entertaining match. They knew that Savage and Steamboat would make the fans feel satisfied. What's interesting about that is at the time, WWF was regarded as a cartoon promotion. But Steamboat and Savage was like Steamboat and Flair. It was an NWA style match. A breathless, athletic match. And that was Vince saying, I can do this too and do it better than you.
What a great match. And it's interesting. I forget what wrestler said it, but they were saying that Vince said that wasn't the best match on the card. Hogan Andre was the best match on the card because it sold the most seats. And it sold that.
It did. If you're a businessman, certainly Savage and Steamboat on the top of that card would not have sold out the Silverdome. Right. Andre and Hogan, look, and even though at that point people were just driving to WrestleMania, it wasn't like now where people fly, but I did interview people who flew there. So that was the beginning of what we see now. Now it's a pilgrimage. Back then, I remember even going to WrestleMania 6 and meeting a fan from Australia. It's like, oh my God, you flew here from Australia? Now, like, no one blinks. There's fans from Qatar and Kuwait and Saudi Arabia sitting there. I'm in the press box. I'm talking to people from New Zealand. Like, everybody goes to it. It's like going to the World Cup.
It is remarkable. I think they said last year was like 87 countries, and it's like, what in the world?
That's always exaggerated.
Right. But it's a lot.
I'm around WrestleMania week. I meet people in every restaurant I go into. When I'm walking down the street, there are people who recognize me. It may not be 87 countries, but it's sure a lot of different places.
What a phenomenon. And really because of Hogan and Andre. I mean, you can't really say WWF without saying both of them.
Right, exactly. So that is what the book is about. And that was why the book was written. And it's, to me, it's it's the story of how professional wrestling evolved into what we see today. And by the way, that's not just WWE. Like what we see, I was at the All In Wembley when they sold over 80,000 tickets. I was at All In this year when they sold, 50,000 tickets. I mean, it's what we know about professional wrestling today. It is an international spectacle. And maybe the average person you meet in day-to-day life is not a wrestling fan, but as they say, to those who believe, no explanation is necessary.
Well said. Yes, I love that. And the thing too about WrestleMania 3, is it does lead to Survivor Series 87, the Royal Rumble they have with the signing of the rematch.
Yeah,
Then it has the main event of
and
88.
a Night of Champions in the NWA, which occurs right before Ted Turner buys the company and turns it into, or Jim Crockett Promotions and turns it into WCW and the Monday Night Raws. But all that pressure is because of Vince McMahon and WrestleMania 3. So I would argue that even what we saw in the Monday Night Raws. I mean the Monday Night Wars. The Monday Night Wars of the 90s, into the very early 2000s, I feel can be tied to WrestleMania 3.
Do you think that Vince would be Vince without WrestleMania 3? Do you know what I mean? Like, would he have been the big success without that? Like, if it was a smaller show?
I mean, the big success, I think we would always, even just because of WrestleMania 1, I think we would always acknowledge Vince McMahon's contributions to pop culture. What WWE became could not have occurred without WrestleMania 3, which is the whole point of the book.
Right. And I feel like, too, with the book, if you're a wrestling fan today, you need to know about wrestling. You need to read the book or you need to study the book because it leads to everything today. Like, it's as important as WrestleMania 40 is or something. You know what I mean? If you're a fan, you need to.
Because you would not have 2 nights of WrestleMania 41 in Vegas without WrestleMania 3. It's like who? You don't have Jesus, being resurrected without the prophet Elijah's prophecy in the Old Testament. One leads to the other. Without the Old Testament, you don't have the New Testament.
Very true. Who made who? Did Hogan make Vince or did Vince make Hogan?
Both. And that's discussed in the book as well. Hulk Hogan, even though he was in Rocky III, would never have become the massive pop culture figure he became without Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon would not have become the enormous success he turned WWE into without Hulk Hogan as the lightning rod.
It's so fascinating too, like with Hogan and this show, and he always tells the story of like, I didn't know if Andre was going to do the job, brother. Like all that. Like, who knows how much
fanciful.
Yes. Would he really not do business? That's always
look. I say it in the book. I mean, I can't get anyone to confirm it, but come on, Vince McMahon had an iron grip on everything. I highly doubt that Vince said, "Hey boys, call in the ring," and he just leaned back on his chair and said, "I'm going to watch it like a fan."
Right. Yeah, that seems far-fetched for sure.
Yeah. But you know what? If Hulk Hogan wants to tell the story long after all of us are gone, and if people are still debating it, hey, it's part of the mythology. One day there'll be college classes on it.
Yes. With WrestleMania 3, was Paul Orndorff like the alternate, if you will, if Andre was injured?
That's a great question, and I really tried to research that. So for the people listening, there's a story that if Andre couldn't physically make it, Paul Orndorff was going to be the alternate. And look, Paul Orndorff against Hulk Hogan, we'd seen a lot of times before. That would not have sold out. Because Paul Orndorff is no longer here, I contacted Paul Orndorff's son. And Paul Orndorff's son, again, who wasn't with him, and it was a young kid at the time, said, "My father never told me anything even resembling that story." So I would wager to guess that that's fiction, but who knows? In wrestling, what do they say? Don't believe anything you hear and only half of what you see.
And the thing with that is Orndorff, for some reason, not on that card. Like they kind of hold them off. And before that, they had the 2 Saturday night main event matches that broke like the records of like the ratings. So like he was a good draw for Hogan. And then the big event in Toronto, they sold
Right.
60,000.
That was the
It
big
was a good
event.
draw. Yeah.
Yes, that was in '86, and they sold out Exhibition Stadium. As far as I know, they sold out, or they came pretty close to selling out Exhibition Stadium in Toronto. So yeah, he was a big draw, but I do not think with all the hype, they could have risked having anybody but Andre the Giant in that.
Are you a big fan of the match itself? I know for some reason there's some guys that say that the match wasn't that good. Does it even need to be? The crowd was so into it. Does it even need to be that good?
I mean, I think you've kind of answered that. Sure, as a work rate fan, I preferred Savage and Steamboat, just like later on I would have preferred the Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels matches. Today, you get a match with a guy like Chad Gable in the ring. That's good enough for me. Those guys can really work. But or Will Ospreay in AEW, Will Ospreay and Kyle Fletcher in AEW. But or Ricochet and Swerve Strickland in AEW. But you know what? I mean, it doesn't really matter because the match itself, Hogan and Andre made it into the best match it could possibly be with the limitations in that match. There's one moment that I describe in the book where Hogan, always conscious of the camera, sees where the camera is when Andre body slams him. Very simple move. We see it in every match. But Hogan makes sure he falls in front of that handheld camera, arches his back, and then flops back down. And if you're watching at home, even now, all these years later, I'm like, wow, that's pretty dramatic.
It's great. I know. I just love the match and the work rate wise. Technically, obviously, Steamboat Savage better, but the crowd is so into it, and you're like, desperate for Hogan to win, and you don't want him to lose, and you're very emotionally invested in that match. It just, I think it's an awesome match, and one of those things where you might not say it's a 5-star match, quote unquote, but to me, it is because everybody remembers it.
Right. Because then you have to again, what's your criteria for a 5-star match?
Right.
Is it a match that, had a 5-star work rate or a match that's unforgettable? Like, let's go back to Brad Rheingans, who was briefly in WWF and was in the AWA. He was an Olympian. As a wrestler goes, few people were ever better. Bob Roop was a great wrestler, great amateur wrestler, and made a pretty good transition to being a professional wrestler. But we don't remember that. We remember Hulk Hogan. And Hulk Hogan was money. And Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon brought us all here. We're not here, sadly, because of Brad Rheingans and Bob Roop. We're here because of Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon.
Well said. Yeah, definitely. I mean, who knows what the wrestling business would be like without the Hulkster?
I don't know. Sometimes, I wonder if, Vince McMahon, according to the book, according to what I've read, and I can't confirm this because it's Vince's narrative, he didn't meet Vince Sr., his father, or Vincent James McMahon, until age 12. Sometimes I think, well, what if, the two McMahons had never met each other? What if Vince continued to be raised by a succession of stepfathers? What would wrestling be like then? And, that's science fiction. We don't know the answer. We can just speculate.
That is true. That's another crazy mystery. What would it have been without Vince? Because obviously he's the genius, the mastermind behind it all.
Right. That's true. And, whatever flaws there were in Vince's presentation during his final years with the company, we have to remember all of those very fertile years.
Very true. Was there anything in the book that kind of surprised you? obviously you know your stuff, but I mean anything like kind of
I
three
mean,
or
I
four
was
weeks.
around for a lot of stuff. Some of the confessions of, especially from some of the people who were in other leagues, I was taken by. Just the acknowledgement. I mean, David Crockett, Jim Crockett Jr.'s brother, he talks about later on when Vince saw the Survivor Series, and then he gave the other cable companies the ultimatum. If you run the Survivor Series, no, if you run Starrcade and not the Survivor Series, you will not get WrestleMania. And so all these companies abandoned Jim Crockett Promotions. And David Crockett essentially says, hey, we were a den of thieves. I hated Vince McMahon for doing that, but I would have done the same to him. He was just thinking a few steps ahead of me. And so, it almost sanitizes Vince McMahon in a way because they're all carnies and they're all trying to get the upper hand on everybody else. I knew that, but it was just the frankness in which that was expressed to me.
Was there anything in the book that like you thought you knew, but like the research or like what basically the research kind of changed it, or something you thought was that?
Look, I would have conversations every day with people. Like, I never knew the story about the number for WrestleMania III, the attendance number being written on a cocktail napkin in advance, and before the people were even in the arena. And I spoke to Basil DeVito, who was the executive, who is supposedly the person who wrote it on the cocktail napkin. And Basil said, there wasn't any, people didn't have cell phones or computers then. I know we came up with a number. We had to write it on something. I'm not going to say it was a cocktail napkin, but I definitely physically wrote that number down. So that was kind of cool to, obviously he's not going to say, yeah, I wrote it on a cocktail napkin and dismiss it. In fact, he vociferously argues that it was 93,000 plus because of all the people who were let in besides the paying fans. But it was kind of fun to go down that rabbit hole and discuss it with the people who were making those decisions, including the number that would be announced to the public.
Yeah, it's always fascinating. Like, you got to beat the Rolling Stones, you got to beat the Pope.
Right.
Like,
Right.
you got to.
Yeah.
It is funny too. Like, if you think about it, it's like the Pope and Rolling Stones. Like, oh my God,
Right. I mean,
WWF.
that's pretty steep competition. And there's a quote in the book from, I guess it's someone from the local diocese or archdiocese. And, he's asked by one of the local reporters, like, are you looking at WrestleMania III as like, a way to present the Pope? And he goes, it's a different audience. And he goes, at least I hope so.
Yeah, true. Like, I hope it's a different audience,
Right.
for wrestling. Yeah. Although, yeah, who knows? You never know. I just love, though, it's like you had to beat the Rolling Stones because they were the number one ticket in town, but you had to beat the Rolling Stones.
Right. And, again, I don't know, were the Rolling Stones conscious of it? I would guess they were onto other things, but the wrestling fans were conscious of it, and we're still talking about it.
Yeah. Man, and it's crazy with Hogan, Andre, just like Vince's idea of like, okay, this is how we're going to present this is how we're going to make a ton of money, and this is how we're going to, lead the charge going forward. Hogan, Andre, and Andre at this point is not on his last leg, as he's going to wrestle basically until 90, and then a little bit after that, shockingly.
But he's
Vince
close.
kind of knew. But Vince kind of knew that was the end.
And Andre knew it was the end, and that's why Andre, from all accounts, wanted to pass the torch to Hogan. Like, this was the time, and that would cement Andre's legacy in history too, because he understood the time-honored tradition of giving to that next generation. Like when I co-wrote the book with Ric Flair told me like he always wanted to lose that important match to Shawn Michaels to anoint him. You are the new me. And I'm guessing that with WrestleMania 41 coming up, this will probably be John Cena laying the crown on Cody Rhodes' head.
Wow, that's so you don't think Cena's going to win as a heel? You think he's going to pull an Andre here?
You know what? He could win as a heel, but like Ric Flair in his heyday, he will still make Cody look more credible than he's ever been before. And this is the guy who dethroned Roman Reigns. I still feel it's an anointing because, again, wins and losses don't matter. It's like Hulk Hogan getting beaten by the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 6. And when the Warrior has his celebration in the ring, Hogan climbs in and he's celebrating with him. So is it a celebration of the Ultimate Warrior, or is it a celebration of Hogan still? I think that John Cena, even if he wins, he will do it in a way that elevates Cody Rhodes into the same category as Roman Reigns and John Cena and The Rock. Regardless, Cody Rhodes will come out of WrestleMania 41 perhaps more of a mainstream personality than he's ever been before.
And if Cena does lose, it would be like Andre. Andre just turned heel. He jobs as a champion who's like the face of the company, and Hogan. So it's very similar if Cena were to lose too. That
I
really hurt
think
anybody.
that Cena will probably win the title just to break that record. But what do I know? It's not like I'm in the booking meetings, and I'm glad I'm not, because that's an awful lot of pressure to live with.
Yeah, they've got a good thing going though with this heel turn.
For now, yes. I mean, it's a cyclical business, but right now, it's pretty hot.
Were you at Madison Square Garden for the cage match, Punk and Rollins?
I was not. I think I was traveling that day. I think I was in Los Angeles. Yeah, I was traveling from Los Angeles back to New York.
Oh, okay. Huge house, 20,000 people at the
I
Garden.
mean, I watched it. Well, I watched the highlights because I was on the plane at that time.
Do you go to many garden shows still? I would imagine yes, right?
Yeah, if I can. When my kids were younger, I would bring them, but then they outgrew. Well, I don't want to say they outgrew me, but in a way, they outgrew me and they outgrew wrestling once they, matured and developed their own interests. So,
I got you.
Yeah, I like to go and I like to meet up with friends. I like to go to big shows. I look forward to Mania Week because, I have friends from all over the world who will be there. And, now they're real friends. They're not like gimmick friends. They're real friends who have spoken about things besides wrestling. And it's wonderful to connect with them. And I'm privileged to be part of the community, as you are too, I'm sure.
It is one of those things where, I don't know, wrestling, it's hard to describe to people that don't like it, but if you're in it and you're a fan of it and you're meeting people that are like-minded with wrestling, nothing beats it. But it's hard to explain to somebody that doesn't like it.
No, because if you don't get it, it's like the thing, like I said before, for those who believe, no explanation is necessary. For those who don't, no explanation is sufficient.
Yes. And now my son's getting into it, and we both know that my wife, obviously his mom, we know she doesn't get it. She just doesn't get it. But she'll never
she
get
gets you, I hope.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. But
it's funny. I went to a wedding this summer. My friend Walt Schwenk, who actually has done a podcast periodically on pro wrestling books, and he's married to a beautiful, smart Belarusian woman. And, she said in her vows, because, wrestling, like him and his brother love wrestling. And, he has all these like wrestling fan friends, and she wants to have a good marriage, and she said in her vows, she goes, I promise to support you in all your interests. And as if it was a wrestling promo, she looked at the people there and she went, even wrestling. And people actually applauded for that.
Nice, nice. I like that. See, she gets it, right? Kind of. Yeah,
She gets it. Yeah. She was at my book release, and of course I goofed on her. And instead of signing the book to him, I signed it to her. And I said, hope this cultivates your growing interest in, the sport of kings, because obviously she rolls her eyes a little when it comes to pro wrestling.
Yes. Now, are you feeling that I know obviously the WWE Encyclopedia, the Ric Flair book, Classy Freddie Blassie, Super Billy Graham, like you're in the lexicon of WWE, especially with the books, but what about WrestleMania now? Do you feel like you're in the lexicon of WrestleMania because you have to read this book if you're, a WrestleMania fan?
Look, I feel that 100 years from now, and maybe I'm being arrogant, people will be reading this book. It's a piece of history. And I exhaustively researched it. I didn't spend 10 years of my life doing it, but I've spent 30 plus years of my life being involved with WWE and, pro wrestling. And, I knew the sources to go to. And unless somebody finds major holes in this, I do feel that it is a guidepost for future books. And at some stage, pro wrestling will be looked at the way other forms of pop culture are. Just like hip hop was dismissed. Just like when Italian gangsters were dancing to the tango in Argentina, that was dismissed. All great forms of art are initially regarded as Hitler called it, degenerate art. Well, degenerate art sometimes becomes the most impactful art of all.
And man, wrestling, it's like you said, it's the cycle of it. It's crazy maybe not more popular than ever, but making more money than ever. So man, that
certainly
cycle
making
is
more
going.
money. I mean, my parents were alive when television started in the U.S. and I heard all about Gorgeous George and Man Mountain Dean and Antonina Rocca. So, I don't know. Maybe it was just them, but it sounds like it was pretty over when there were many other television choices.
Big time. And hey, look at 88 for the main event. 33 million people watching Hogan and Andre. Right. So I mean, that's huge.
But again, that's a different time because there wasn't streaming, there wasn't a ton of events. I mean, 88 in my neighborhood in Queens where I grew up, we didn't even have cable yet. So yeah, the entertainment choices were limited, but it still shows how popular it was at the time.
Absolutely. And I know inflation, everything else today is kind of why they're making more money, but still they're selling out the Garden all the time. They're selling out all these other arenas. They're selling out internationally.
No, right now they're selling out everything. I mean, I was at Bash in Berlin this summer, and I was told that the cheapest ticket possible was like $350 for, a American for, an event that when I was wandering around Berlin, there were a lot of people, like I was telling people that I was there for Bash in Berlin. A lot of people didn't know what it was. But man, when you got to that arena, the people sure knew what it was. And they were willing to spend the money to be there.
It's one of those things where they'll pay exorbitant amount of money. Even when I went to the show at MSG, tell you what, I paid a ton for a Raw. You know what I mean? Like I paid way more than you would think. So I was in, section 220. So it's the mid. They were $175 a piece.
And I got a lot of money.
But I got probably the cheapest because I saw them above me. I saw them online selling them for $200. So I was like, holy crap! Right. I got lucky when I was bought.
And I've said this in other interviews for this book. My grandparents had moved down to Miami because my uncle was a baker at a hotel on Collins Avenue, Miami Beach. And they lived with my uncle. And we used to go to Miami Beach Convention Hall. See, I remember we once saw Jack Briscoe against Harley Race when Race was the champion. And it would be my father, my sister, my uncle, my grandfather, my cousins, whole family. We could just, spend a couple of dollars and go in there. Nobody had a lot of money. A family like that, there's no way a family of 8 could spend $175 a piece when they're. Right. My father was a construction worker. My uncle was a baker. Families like that were not like at Madison Square Garden last week.
That is true. I don't know how I did it either, because 175 was like, whoa, for a Raw. I was like, that's going to be pretty steep. But I felt like I had to do it for the Garden. I had to do it for Punk and Rollins in the cage. I feel like we had to do it.
Well, it was a pretty great match too.
Yes, and my son loves Jey Uso, so we had to go there and get all the Yeet stuff and go.
Yeah, it's funny we haven't even discussed Jey Uso. Like, I mean, I love Gunther as a performer. He's probably, maybe him and Ospreay may be my favorite wrestlers today. But if Jey Uso doesn't win that championship on night 1 and the whole, stadium isn't eating, I think a lot of people will feel ripped off.
Yes, 100%. They love the entrance, the energy. Just he's over like Rover. He's got to have the payoff.
Right. And you know what? Like, I know his family. I've, spent time in Alpha the Samoans' home. My kids have been around that family. I know I've known The Rock's mother. I've known his grandmother. I'm really excited for that family for that moment. They had the satisfaction with Roman Reigns. I know Rikishi. I really want that family to be able to celebrate that, as much as I hate to see Gunther lose, because he's just such a fantastic performer.
He's been such a good champ, Gunther. Yeah. He's awesome.
He is a champ. He's a guy, like, he has that championship around him, and you can argue, well, who's the best champ there is? And he's one of those guys. When I was a kid, you'd say, well, who would win in a fight, Bruno Sammartino or Joe Frazier? It's similar to that. With Gunther, you can argue he'd beat anybody.
So true. To me, he just exudes like, man, this guy's legit. Like, this guy's like, could legit beat
everybody. And he is legit. I mean, look at all the weight he's lost. Like, consistently, he's such a great performer.
So many good matches. But as we start to hit the wind down here, start to hit towards the finish, tell us why everybody should get Bigger, Better, Better, the WrestleMania 3 book.
It's called Bigger, Better, Badder, WrestleMania 3 and the Year It All Changed by ECW Press. You can pick it up on Amazon or any other website. You can also get it from the ECW Press website. A shout out to my executive editor, Michael Holmes, who believed in the project from the beginning, because it explains that you cannot understand where professional wrestling is today without knowing what brought us here. And WrestleMania 3 is what brought us to this point. And it not only is the story about WrestleMania 3, but it is the story of the industry at the time, and how it was transformed by this seminal event. And, and it's in the voices of the people who were there. And in the years to come, some of us, and I include myself in that category, although I intend to be around for a long time, some of us will no longer be around to tell the story, but this book will still be here to tell the story.
Now, where can everybody find you, social media and otherwise, and all the other projects that you worked on?
Look, you actually have my Twitter handle up there. And when I wrote it, I misspelled my last name. So it is at Keith E. Greenberg. And at one point, I'm like, do I change that? It's like, not with the amount of Twitter followers you have. So, people can find me on Facebook, but, I'm very close to my limit there, and people can find me. It's Keith.e.Greenberg on Instagram, because at one point I had another Instagram handle and someone hacked it. And it was a great scam, because of all the people they previously hacked, they hacked a fan who buys my books, comes to my signings, finds me at events, a guy I really like. And they found him, and it's like, hey, click my new page. And it's like, of course I'll do it for this dude. And about 3 minutes later, my friend Fiona in Scotland messages me. She goes, you're selling Bitcoin on Instagram right now.
Holy
moly. So I had to start a new page, but everybody's been through that.
Crazy. WrestleMania 3 and the year it all changed, bigger, better. Everybody should pick up this book. Like I said, this is like a history book. If you're a current fan and an old school fan alike, everybody, you should all get it, because this is a history book. You need to know about WrestleMania 3 before you watch WrestleMania 41, in my humble opinion.
Yes, I would hope. It's a good tease to WrestleMania 41. Yes. And with all the excitement regarding WrestleMania 41, I predict that this will be a pretty quick read, because you're already jazzed up.
Awesome. Keith, thank you so much for all the time tonight. Really appreciate it.
John, I